Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Blagg, and I will be talking to you today about Kwame Nkrumah. He was a figure whose influence fundamentally shaped the map and political consciousness of the entire African continent. His story is one of determination, triumph, and ultimately complex tragedy. So, who is Kwame Nkrumah? He was born as Francis Kwame Nkrumah in 1909. He was a towering figure of the mid 20th century. He was born in Nkrumah in the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana. He was the undisputed leader of the Gold Coast's independence movement and became the first president of Ghana. While primarily located in West Africa, his activism was heavily active in the Pan-African movement that spanned over the entire continent. He also hosted the 1958 All-African Peoples Conference, which brought together independence leaders and laid the groundwork for the OAU, which will be mentioned later in the presentation. He was a continental visionary who saw Ghana's freedom as merely the first step toward the total liberation of Africa. As you can see from this map, the colony was split into different areas. At the bottom there, you see the Gold Coast colony. Above that, Asante, and then above that, the Northern Territories. The nation gained its independence from British rule in 1957 and then was officially renamed Ghana. In 1930, he graduated from Akimota College, a prestigious teacher training college, and met some early mentors there. The first mentor I will mention is Nnamdi Azikiwe. He is a journalist and African nationalist. Nnamdi had a more direct, pivotal influence on Nkrumah's commitment to Black nationalism and his decision to study abroad. Nkrumah heard Nnamdi, a journalist and future Nigerian president, speak while he was a student at Akimota, and Azikiwe advised Nkrumah to enroll at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania in America, as he served as a mentor for Nkrumah there. His mentorship at Lincoln University connected Nkrumah to the global network of Black intellectuals who were fighting white supremacy and colonial rule, reinforcing his commitment to Black nationalism. This connection transformed his focus from purely academic theory to revolutionary action. The second mentor I will mention is Dr. Kwigere Agree. Dr. Agree was, as the assistant vice principal and first African staff member at Akimota College, where Nkrumah studied, he was a powerful, inspirational role model for young African students. Agree was an influential proponent of Pan-Africanism, and Agree's philosophy of original thinking and education influenced Nkrumah's own views on the importance of widespread modern education. Agree's famous black and white keys analogy told that society needed both Black and white people to work together to create harmony, which was very influential at the time. Next, with his education in 1935 to 1945, he studied at Lincoln University and got a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Theology, and he went to the University of Pennsylvania, where he gained a Master of Arts in Philosophy and a Master of Science Education. He was exposed to and deeply influenced by Pan-Africanism and socialist Marxist thoughts there. He worked odd jobs like washing dishes or working at a soap factory in order to pay for his schooling. The 4 degrees that he got in theology, sociology, education, and philosophy reflect his holistic view of revolution. He believed freedom required not just political action, but also spiritual, social, and educational liberation. His odd jobs like washing dishes or working at a soap factory were a financial necessity, but they also solidified his identity with the working class, whom he later successfully mobilized in the CPP, which I will talk about. And there was the 5th Pan-African Congress in 1945, moved to London and co-organized the pivotal 5th Pan-African African Congress in Manchester with George Padmore. It was instrumental in establishing the political blueprint for African leaders to demand immediate independence and unify the anti-colonial struggle. It declared that colonial powers should recognize the right of colonized peoples to self-determination, and that if they failed to do so, the colonies would resort to force if necessary. This was a radical departure from earlier Pan-African movements. In 1947, Nkrumah returned to the Gold Coast, initially joining the existing independence movement, the United Gold Coast Convention (UGCC), as the Secretary General. However, he found that the UGCC's leadership was too slow and elitist. The leaders were conservative, wealthy lawyers and merchants who wanted a gradual transition of power. In 1949, he broke from the UGCC to found the Convention People's Party. It was a mass-based party that mobilized workers, farmers, market women, and youth. Nkrumah's CPP was truly revolutionary because it gave political power to the common man, the workers, women, laborers, and youth. This mass support made the party unbeatable in elections. It was famous for the slogan "Self-government now." And this was not just a demand, it was a rejection of compromise. It cut through the slow, deliberative process favored by the British and UGCC, giving the masses a simple, powerful call to action. In 1950, he led a campaign of nonviolent protests, strikes, and non-cooperation with the British colonial administration. The British responded by imprisoning him, but the strategy paid off. In the 1951 general election, the CPP won a landslide victory while Nkrumah was still incarcerated. The British were then forced to release him to become the leader of government business. This dramatically demonstrated the power of the mass movement and the will of the people. In 1957, the Gold Coast became the first sub-Saharan African nation to achieve independence. Nkrumah declared, "Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever." Nkrumah also said, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent." In 1960, Ghana declared a republic, and Nkrumah became the first president. And this was the spark that ignited the final phase of African decolonization. If Ghana could do it, every other nation believed they could too. The accomplishments under his leadership, Nkrumah was the foremost advocate for a United States of Africa. He was the founding father of the Organization of African Unity in 1963 and actively supported and funded liberation movements across the continent. The Akosombo Dam on the Volta River, which created one of the world's largest man-made lakes to provide cheap hydroelectric power for industrialization, the creation of the Tema Harbor and the industrial city of Tema. Both were not just about power, it was about economic sovereignty. The plan was to use a cheap electricity to power an aluminum smelter, which would then industrialize Ghana's economy, reducing reliance on cocoa revenue. Nkrumah viewed these projects as necessary steps to defeat neocolonialism. He also established universities over his own name, like Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and also a national system of free and compulsory basic education. In 1963, he co-founded the Organization of African Unity. Even though his vision for a single unified government was rejected, he cemented the framework for African political cooperation. There is the one-party state. In 1964, he officially declared Ghana a one-party state, making his CPP the only legal party and essentially guaranteeing him power for life. and he also started the Preventative Detention Act. This law allowed the government to imprison political opponents without trial for up to 5 years, later extended to 10. This obviously led to fear and widespread public resentment. And this act was initially justified as necessary to quell political violence, especially in the Santee region, but it quickly became Nkrumah's main tool for silencing democratic dissent. The journalist and UGCC founder J.B. Danquah, whom Nkrumah superseded, died in prison after being detained under the PDA. While he was on a peace mission to Vietnam and Beijing, China, his government was overthrown by the Ghanaian military and police. It was partly driven by economic distress due to falling cocoa prices and high project costs and military resentment of his domestic policies. Nkrumah's growing paranoia led him to bypass the traditional military command and rely increasingly on a loyal Soviet-trained presidential guard. This direct challenge to the army's authority and was the final catalyst for the military resentment. In 1966 through 1972, he accepted asylum from his friend, who named him honorary co-president of Guinea. He spent his last years writing extensively, focusing on revolutionary strategy and the mechanics of neocolonialism. Ultimately, in 1972, he died of cancer in Bucharest, Romania, where he was seeking medical treatment. Now that we have covered the timeline of his life, I want to go over his traits and kind of think back about what I said and where we can see them. First of all, he was a visionary. He had a future-focused outlook for a unified, independent, and industrialized Africa. He was very charismatic. He was highly engaging and had a magnetic personality, also an effective public speaker, which obviously could take him very far in his position and ultimately gave him a lot of power. He was assertive, extremely driven, and goal-oriented, especially in the face of colonial authority. Two traits that might not be as smiled upon: he was impulsive. He was prone to making quick, high-stake decisions, particularly in economic policy and international affairs. And at the end of his rule, he was authoritarian, which he exhibited a style of rule that became increasingly repressive, intolerant of dissent, and centralized power. His major philosophies and ideologies: Pan-Africanism, advocate, believing in the unity of all Africans on the continent, and his famous declaration, "Our independence is meaningless unless it's like the whole African continent." His positive action, his strategy, using nonviolent methods to protest and strike against colonial administration. Neocolonialism, which was credited with applying this term, or he was credited with applying this term to be continued financial and political structures that hindered African development despite formal independence. And then African socialism. His administration followed a primarily socialist and nationalist path. So far his life is really interesting, and he's had many accomplishments, and it's gone very far and has had a lot of education, but ultimately he is universally known as Ghana's founding father and a visionary champion of Pan-Africanism. His success leading in first sub-Saharan nation to independence ignited the liberation movement across the continent. He was a brilliant anti-colonial strategist and intellectual whose dreams of African unity clashed with the realities of power, leading to his overthrow. Well, I hope you all enjoyed listening to this. I had a fun time learning about Nkrumah, and thank you for watching.